This periodical is called the Argosy, and it's August 1905 is the version. There's a story in it. There's lots of stories in it. The one in it that I will read today is called A Speculation in Shirts. A Speculation in Shirts by L.H. Bickford. What the difference between the lucky and the only dollar meant to Sowders, and how he contrived to turn a foolish investment into a bonanza. As to whether Sowders was a fool of luck or a great financier, there has long been a division of opinion in Tontic. It is, however, certain that he impressed himself on the community. The circumstances of his arrival are obscure, for he was merely an addition of one to the changing population. We first hear of him in the chronicles of the time, as they are now more or less legendary, on a night in January when the Crystal Palace was filled with the light and life of the mining camp. He entered it, according to report, like a breeze from the snow hills. In one hand he held an assay certificate, and in the other a large sum of money. He was but a head taller than the bar, and when all there had been summoned about him, he stepped upon the seat of a lookout chair, that he might not be lost in the crowd gathered to accept his invitation of cheer. There he stood a while, the crowd constantly augmented, and anon he lifted his glass, toasted the lucky dollar mine, and called on all to witness that an assay ticket did not lie. Many toasts followed until, in the end, Sowders rolled down from his perch and stumbled out into the street to leave those that hung on to the fringes of Tautic nightlife in other hospitable hands. Crystal Palace diversions were varied, and when Sowders was gone, he was presently forgotten in the excitement offered by the arrival of a man from Bull Siding who had come to shoot the under-sheriff. Sowders passed up Tontic Avenue in the best of humor. A man who had a mission to kill did not then interest him. Why ugly death as an amusement when there was gold to be had in the lucky dollar and a place to put the gold into circulation? Many places, for that matter, since the Crystal Palace was duplicated everywhere up and down the street. He entered the maze of them, and there were more toasts, then out, then in, and so on until, and here our story begins, he was come to the shining front of the Levi Brothers Gents' Furnishings store, the rendezvous of male fashion in Tontic, the mart of neckties and other fripperies. The lures of the Levi brothers were in two large windows. In one was a stiff gentleman of faultless form, who wore a pepper and salt suit of clothes, a derby hat, and patent leather shoes, an effect that might have reproduced in toto for the inconsiderable sum of $30.75. This glass of fashion was companioned by a woodeny child, whose $7 sailor suit was the bargain blazoned upon the sign in the window. These figures did not comprise all the enticements. A glass jar containing beans sat on the field of a pink and blue silk handkerchief. This was a game. He who came nearest to guessing the number of beans in the jar, provided he had previously purchased $1 worth of goods, received, at a stated time, and after the beans had been counted, a large gold watch that lay in a velvet case at the feet of the gentleman in the salt and pepper suit. And here also were colored ties, jeweled scarf pins, glittering studs and buttons, and checked hose. Sowders, leaning for support against a watchmaker's post, contemplated the glories in the Levi window for some minutes. His eyes traveled from the pepper and salt suit to the bean jar, from the sailor boy to the golden buttons. They lingered for a time on the velvet case, and finally they fell to the least of these things, as far as their vogue in Tontic went, a box of shirts whose stiff white bosoms glittered under the gaslight. Sowders moved forward. In all his life, this prospector tramped wearily, going by trail from camp to camp, delivering now here, now there, now winning, now losing, had never owned a white shirt with a stiff, shiny bosom. Until that moment, he had never considered white shirts desirable. But with the assay certificate clutched in his left hand, the white shirts opened a new life to him. He saw himself sitting in the rotunda of the Windsor Hotel in Denver, his shirt bosom shining as it rose from a waistcoat of scarlet, at his collar a string tie of solemn black. The vision was not impossible for realization. The assay certificate told him that. Sowders opened the door and went in. He was not at this time entirely articulate, but young Mr. Abram Levi, the younger member of the firm, had keen understanding. In a trice, he surrounded his customer with a mountain of shirts. They overflowed from blue boxes with their tissue paper surroundings. Their bosoms gleamed and shone, and it seemed that their white arms reached up in supplication. Sowders was bewildered. He had wanted one white shirt. Young Mr. Levi had tempted him with all there were in stock. Sowders wavered. The pity of it, to take one lone shirt from its fellows when all seemed eager to become the property of the discoverer of the lucky dollar. The injustice of it to leave these brother shirts to their eventual fate as part of the apparel on the regardless form of a faro dealer or the man in the lookout chair. Sowders made a sudden resolution. "I want them all," said he to the young Mr. Levi. "All, each and several. You call a 'spress wagon." Within 10 minutes, the store of the Levi brothers was destitute of white shirts, and within a half hour, Sowders was sitting on the seat of an express wagon, rolling happily along towards the lucky dollar mine. The driver turned now and then to glance back at the boxes, after which he would crack his whip and whistle. It was odd, but a fare was a fare, and a job was a job, and all sorts of people came to Tontic. For 2 days, the world was a mist to Sowders. On the third day, he was awakened to a sense of the gauntness of life and of the uncertainties of the future. Luck deserted him, and without seeming reason. The cup of dreams was snatched from him. There had been a hideous mistake at the assay office. The certificate he held was that of another, the owner of the only, not the lucky dollar. When he had obtained his own card, it told nothing of the stored riches. There was, to be sure, a trace of lead in the samples he had left, but the hollowness of the air caused him to hasten from the assay office before the chemist had concluded his apology for the blunder. No apology could reconcile Sowders to the situation of not being a prospective millionaire. And more than this, he had squandered in premature celebration the cash stake he had been so long accumulating against his Tontic venture. He went back to his fireless, grubless, and necessarily cheerless cabin, piled high with white, stiff-bosomed shirts, and as he contemplated the symbols of his extravagance, at the picture of himself in the lobby of the Windsor Hotel faded, he sat on the side of his bunk and groaned aloud. And it was then, as if the Snow King was moved to pity for the spendthrift, that the heavens shook great white flakes from lowering clouds and covered the earth. The snow fell for days until Tontic, 80 miles from a railway station, 10,000 feet above sea level, approachable only by winding roads up the mountain sides, found itself cut off from the great world without. A year before, when the camp was in the first bloom of its youth, a similar incident had not concerned anyone. Tontic had been snowbound for 20 days and had survived. It would doubtless survive now, even if its supply of fresh meat was not forthcoming. The tin can of civilization was here, for the tin can ever accompanies the advance to the frontier. The Tontic commissary stocked against just such an emergency with the all-seasonable things that come in tins, square and circular, tins oblong and flat, tins gaily covered or merely stamped, would serve an army. Tontic sank back complacently after the first week of the snow blockade, blessing the tin can, but it sat holt upright directly when it appeared that there was a famine in something to which the community had never before given a thought. And as this famine, strangely enough, had to do with the folly of Sowders, mention must be made at once of a most important person, the most important person in Tontic society, Mrs. Senator B.V.L. Judson, wife of the representative of the Tontic and Eldora districts in the upper house of the state legislature. Coincident with the beginning of the storm, Mrs. Judson had announced a function at the Tontic Grand Hotel to which all that was socially possible in this town had been bidden. It is not too extravagant to say that in this function the camp faced its first great social event. It had been whispered that Mrs. Judson had contracted for the entire second floor of the canvassary, and as for expanse, Senator Judson had himself consigned the question to a place remote. And it was further reported that among the items to grace the banquet were the rare and succulent provisions of the oyster beds to be transported directly from the seashore thousands of miles away. These provisions had indeed providentially arrived with the last loads of freight that came into the camp before traffic was interrupted, and had since been on ice awaiting the eventful night. Therefore, let the storm king rage, Mrs. Judson was not to be denied. And thus, on the eve of the great function, when the 500 elect of Tontic, and they were at this period mostly masculine, quivered with anticipation of the morrow, a short hoarse cry rang out into the night. It was a cry for a white shirt with a stiff bosom. The cry went far and was echoed. Tontic made no great exactions in the matter of dress. In general, it worried along in the blue flannel and corduroy. But here was more serious matter. Respect for Mrs. Senator Judson, respect for a parlor affair demanded of all male comers at least a white shirt and a string tie. And it was the discovery that white shirts were not on the market that caused strong men to utter the language that comes only with great emotions. In vain the Levi brothers affected to explain. In vain they realized too late that Mr. Abram Levi had made the financial mistake of his life when he sold for $2 each shirts that would now bring almost any amount. And vainer still was the pleading of the Levis after they had gone down the long street to Sowders' cabin, and there offered him double and thrice his money. For Sowders, sitting in the midst of ruin, cowering under remorse, had at once grasped the situation and sent his callers forth with a stern and firm voice. When therefore a committee of earnest citizens, representing nearly all who had been favored with an invitation to Mrs. Judson's epoch-making party, waited upon Sowders after Levi's negotiations had failed, they found a calm, supremely poised individual, basking in the sunlight of self-confidence. He listened, unmoved, to entreaties. The offers of $5 a shirt were scorned. Not until the gentle art of sarcasm came into play did he show a trace of color. "You won't lend 'em to us?" complained an exasperated committeeman. "And you won't take a reasonable offer for 'em? So what we'd like to know is what you reckon you're going to do with 'em." "It has occurred to me," said Sowders suavely, "that I might wear 'em. It has happened to occur to my dense intellect that way." "So you might," scorned the committeeman, "although I present this argument to these here, that it's strange, a man who wants 300 shirts, when he ain't changed the one he's got on for what appears to be a spell of about 2 months. Sowders looked pained, but not surprised. Ignoring the speaker, he glanced into the crowd that accompanied him, and in a stately self-respect spoke these words: "It is one of my precepts that any man's got a right to say right out anything he might have on his mind in a general way, so long as he don't break through any sidewalls into the claim of another man's feelings. Now, my shirt goes to the sluice every Tuesday afternoon, whether I've won or 50. I don't take no assay to see that the gentlemen assembled here beneath my roof have a matter of wearing apparel they desire to air. If this meeting has a spokesman who is familiar with the fundamental rules of etiquette to be observed when one respectable citizen is addressing another, it's his turn to get into the bucket and give the signal to proceed the talk." Thus Sowders, proud, injured, innocent. The man who had spoken fell back, and the crowd gathered to itself. Tact, it was plain, was needed here, and was meet the task fell to the justice of the peace. "The esteemed fellow citizen who had just spoke," said the justice in a tone of conciliation, "voiced his sentiments in a spirit of what we may call shirtless exasperation, and his condition of mind is to be taken into account." I need not remind the Honorable Mr. Sowders here that the situation which confronts many of the people of this camp is in many respects peculiar. We take a survey, we find that we are each and generally committed to a social duty it would be ungallant for any gentleman to shirk. We find that there are certain necessities of sartorial art inescapable with carrying on this duty, accessories, I may say, that are indispensable in the presence of ladies, and it further appears that the principal accessory is, to wit, a white boiled shirt. So far as I am concerned, gentlemen, here the justice turned to the listening committee, while his bosom swelled, so far as I am concerned, rather than appear at Mrs. Senator Judson's function without the proper embellishment of a white boiled shirt, rather than insult that lady by appearing without it, rather than flaunt in her face a blue flannel turned me down or a calico made easy, I would go forth into the night of social oblivion. We know what is demanded of us, gentlemen. We cannot plead ignorance of social custom. We either go in the manner somewhat described as au fait, or we don't go at all. And if we don't go at all, we deliberately cut the feelings of a lady. There could be no dissent to this presentation of facts and conditions. The committee solemnly declared its truth. Being so, continued the justice, we confront the Honorable Mr. Sowders and the question of his shirts. We cannot deny three things, gentlemen. They are that Mr. Sowders has the shirts, that it is desirable that we obtain them, and that it rests with Mr. Sowders to point the way to the gratification of our desires. And we must not act in haste, nor with temper. It is not to be denied that Mr. Sowders is honorably possessed of these shirts, the same as if they were wheat or corn or any of the commodities of the market that are likely to be in demand. They are his, paid for with his cash, and for him to have and to hold until he sees fit to part with them, which brings us to this point of our mission. We are given to understand, Mr. Sowders, that you refused the Messrs. Levi for their offer of $6 each for these shirts. Sowders, still standing beside the table, waved one hand to the justice in appreciative cordiality. At the same time, his face did not relax its severity. The understanding you have, he said, is unanimously correct. Then may I ask, resumed the justice, if you have fixed any particular price on the precious articles that are now in your possession? The committee made a movement that suggested the keenest interest. Replying to your perfectly respectable question, said Sowders, I will say that I have fixed a price, and further replying, I will say that I do not propose to dispose of these shirts in no common way. I've been revolving the situation in my mind, Mr. Justice and gentlemen of the committee. I am not necessary. In fact, my nature is calculated to respond to them that's in distress, or that has struck bottom with nothing to show for it. If you were poor gentlemen and came to me empty of pocket, distressed, demanding of my white shirts, I would give freely. But as I take it, this is no 10-cent community looking for alms. A murmur of assent told Sowders that he was not in a 10-cent community. In fact, the faces of several of the citizens of Tontic reflected resentment. We are quite able here, ventured the Justice of the Peace, to pay any price you may ask. I will ask you to remember them words, said Sowders, when I have related to you the fable of the King of Egypt. The crowd stared curiously. Sowders placed one hand on the table for support and gazed serenely toward his visitors. I am acting under historical precedent, he said. As my fellow citizen, the justice may recall from his studies of the land of the pharaohs, and I am not speaking of layout, gentlemen. There was once a king who ruled over a good acreage of land, but who had trouble finding producers. His treasury was empty at about the time the gods called on him to build a temple, and as he owed the affiliated orders of Egypt, pyramid masons, and bricklayers pretty heavy for some old jobs, things began to look black. Just here the court philosopher, who usually had a vein he could tap even if it was only in his head, hove on the scene as radiant as the dews of the morn. "What do you want, O mighty king," said this here philosopher, "is a special assessment tax." "It won't work," said the king. "I've only about 500,000 people. And if I make the ordinary average equality tax, there won't be enough to build a side wall, let alone a whole temple. We've been taxing the poor until they got nothing left to take. And as for the rich, they've got their assessment cases up before the Supreme Court now, on the basis that the last levy was too high. I've got about 2,000 millionaires, it is true, but I don't seem to be able to get at 'em. Going to show, gentlemen, that times hasn't changed so all-fired much. And now comes the court philosopher with his scheme. What you want, O king, says he, is to excite these millionaires into a game of chance. You just announce a Royal Nile lottery, of which half the proceeds go to building the temple and the other half to the man who draws the lucky number, and you issue just 2,000 tickets for the same game of chance. You don't want any ordinary lottery. The stakes must be high. It occurs to me, O king, that the loyal subject who draws number 1 should pay therefore 1 piece of gold, the second 2 pieces, and the third 3, and so on to the end, when you've got your capital prize to be cut in half, amounting to the sum total of 2,000 pieces of gold added down to 1. The moral of these remarks, gentlemen, was that the king was struck mightily. The Royal Nile Lottery went into operation, and the result was one of the monuments of architecture, the ruins of which we see in Egypt today, if we happen to travel those trails. And now, my fellow citizens, I've no wish to prolong or to adorn this parable. History is a great thing. It has come to my rescue in this crisis. My proposition is this. In a proper receptacle will be placed 300 pieces of paper, numbered consecutively. The fortunate individual drawing number 1 gets his shirt for the inconsiderable sum of $1, one half of what I paid for the same. The second pays $2, the third 3, as it was in Egypt, and each figure thereafter represents a similar advance. In this way, we may dispose of the problem that confronts us. Any other way, I regret to state, and I keep the shirts. The auditors of Sowders did not at once break their silence when he had concluded. They were confused, partly by this plunge into history or fable, and partly by the mathematics presented. Understanding first dawned on the individual who had offended Sowders by his reference to laundry shortcomings. "This means," he said slowly, addressing the happy owner of the shirt mine, "that one of us pays $300 for the privilege of appearing at Mrs. Senator Judson's soiree in one of these genteel furnishings. Am I right?" "The idea," assented Sowders, "seems to have percolated." "And somebody else pays $299, and then the scale drops," assented the shirt man. He who had grasped the situation turned on the others. "Don't you see?" he exclaimed. "The way he figures it out is better'n if he'd busted up Pharaoh Charlie's. Don't you see that he's smelting free millin' ore? He'll get a pile out of these shirts. It's geometry. I can't figure it out. But it's geometry, and it's like the frog what jumps 2 feet up in the well and falls back 3. His companions stared. Some attempted to count on their fingers. Others made hopeless mental calculations. Sowders broke in on their bewilderment by another statement of facts. "It ain't geometry," he said calmly. "It's plain addition and some division. It means just $41,500 to me, or it means nothing. I may remark in this connection that I ain't sojourning here for the benefits afforded by the climate, or to rebuild a racked and wasted constitution, but, sadly, I had calculated there was sportin' instincts in this population." The justice spoke again. "Of course, we can all send our regrets to Mrs. Judson." He got no further. There was a babble of protest. It welled up vigorously from a large person who longed for oysters, and it was shrilled by a thin citizen who reminded everyone within earshot that whatever he was not cheap. The objections were so general and pointed that the justice recalled his remark. He had made the suggestion purely at random, he said, in a thoughtless moment, and in the interest of economy. But he would be the last, he averred, to criticize the unique proposition made by Mr. Sowders. which was perfectly legal as well as worth attention from its historical inception. And the truth was that the element of speculation appeared directly to the majority of Sowders' hearers. Theirs was a life of chance. Chance sent them into the rock-fast hills by day. Chance brought them together in the halls of the Tontic by night. Chance was a game, now lost, now won. The pursuit of chance made the blood tingle. Chance was life. And he who brought chance in a new form was to be considered. He offered something to the sport of luck. Sowders smiled faintly as the men before him were swept by the wave of chance that drowned the miners' voices of protest. He knew his market and those who would come to purchase. At the Crystal Palace, an hour later, a pyramid of shirt boxes rose picturesquely from the center of the room, guarded by Sowders. On a nearby table, Pharaoh Charlie sorted little bits of paper and placed them in a jar. And when he had concluded his task, a line of 300 men formed in a circle about the room and began a procession past the given point of interest. As each man reached the jar, his hand shot into the opening and his fingers closed on a piece of paper. A ridiculously simple transaction, yet offering movements of suspense that were highly dramatic. For as the number was high or low, the possessor was correspondingly depressed or elated, and his luck deplored or approved by his interested friends. He was followed from the jar to the pyramid, where, in exchange for the cash equivalent of the number he had drawn, Sowders gave him a box containing one white, stiff-bosomed shirt. There never was such a night. It reached its height when the disclosure was made that to the justice of the peace fell the pleasure of paying for the $300 shirt, which remains to this day the highest price ever paid for an article of this sort within the borders of Colorado. The end.